Hello and welcome everybody, this is Roland Hartmann from GraphicInMotion.com and I'm back with another Stardust tutorial for Superluminal.tv. Let's take a look what we are going to create in this tutorial. This time we will play a little bit with the new physics features in Stardust and we will create this nice 3D intro. We will create this kind of a ball pit here and then we will create this 3D title that pushes through our particles. If you do not have Stardust already installed on your system, then I would recommend that you jump over to Superluminal.tv website and there you can get Stardust either through AE scripts or you can download a free trial version. And if you have never used the physics options in Stardust before, then I would recommend that you take a look at the tutorial section and that you watch my latest tutorial that's called Stardust Physics, and this is a basic introduction into the physical features of Stardust. Now let's get started inside After Effects. In After Effects, first of all, I will create a new composition, of course, and I will call this my main comp, and I just use an HDTV 1080 preset and the duration is 10 seconds. And now I create a new solid and call this Stardust. Now let me rearrange this a bit so that I have a little bit more room to work here. And I will apply the Stardust effect to my layer. And you see, then we have some particles here. But I do not want to start with these particles, so I just delete the emitter and the particle node here. I want to start with some models because the first thing we have to do is we have to create something like a collider object that will catch our physical sphere particles. And to create that, I will just use simple primitives. So let's add a model node. And inside the model node, we will change the source from file to primitive. And I want to use a cube. Now let me change the size here on X to 500 particles, on Y 20 and on Z 500 as well. So we get a square that is lying flat in our scene. And if I add a light and a camera, then we can see this. So let's add a light here. I take a parallel light for now, add this to my scene. Now I can choose or change to the custom view and now you see what's happening right here. So let me add a quick null object that will help me to easily position my light. This will be my light now. I just use this, I make it 3D and then I just parent the point of interest of my parallel light, which is right here on the transform. I will just parent this to my position. And the reason why I do this is because then I can easily position my parallel light. So I just can take it now. Oops, something didn't work out here. So undo this. So Alt click the point of interest and then just link it to the position. Okay, that's it. Now this is right in the center of my comp, and if I now move this light, and now you see the point of interest will always stay in the middle of my comp. And if I do not do this, then it moves with the light and makes positioning way more complicated. So let's just drag this over here a little bit. And in our light settings, let's increase the distance so that we get more light in our scene. Okay, so this is the first thing to do, and I will just colorize these in the same color because that way I know these belong together. Now I also want to introduce or create a camera, so let's create a new camera. In this case I will use a 50mm one-noded camera and I will create another null object, and this null object will be my cam control. I'll make it 3D, call it cam control, and then just parent my camera as it is to this layer. And again, I always like to colorize these the same way that I know they belong together. Okay, so the next step is to work on this collider object. And I want to create kind of a box that is catching my particles. So let's duplicate this model node here by pressing Ctrl and D. Let's select model number 2 and let's change some primitive properties. I will change the size on X to 20 and the size on Y to 500. And you see this will create another wall that is just oriented the other way. And now in my model properties, I can shift this. I want to shift it on the x-axis for 250 pixels because then it will exactly sit on this edge here. Now I will just duplicate this model, Ctrl D, and create another wall. And I just have to shift this over here. So instead of plus 250, we can put in minus 250. And now let's create a back and a front wall. So one more time, duplicate this. And this time I want this to be orientated on the X. So we will put in 500 on X, 500 on Y, and 20 on Z. This will create a plane that is oriented like this. And now I can shift this. So let's set this to 0 on X and shift it 250 on Z. And one more duplicate here to create my front wall. And I will just change this now to minus 250. Okay, now I've created this kind of a box setup here. And this will catch my particles. But to react to particles, I have to turn it into a physical object. And I can turn it into a physical object by adding a physical node. So let's add a physical node. It's this symbol right here. And now let's link all these model nodes to the physical node. Inside my physical settings now, I turn this into a kinematic object. I don't want these to be dynamic. I just want these to act as a collider. And this is actually what kinematic objects do. And I don't want to use a sphere to simulate. I want to use the shape of the model. And all other settings we can leave as they are. Now I also want this to be invisible, and to make it invisible I can create a material, and I add this and link it to all my model nodes. And inside my material I can now change this from solid to transparent, and inside the transparent material settings I can just set both of these values to 0. And then this will disappear. And to make this a little bit more organized, I can now select all of my nodes, create a group node. It's that one here. And with my group node, so again I have to select all of these. And in the group node, I can now click Add. Now all of these selected nodes are inside my group. So I will call this now Collider. And now it's just out of the way because I will not have to change anything in this collider anymore. And I can also hide them in my effect controls panel to make it a little bit easier to work with. And therefore I just click this little hide button here for all my model nodes and the physical node and the material node. Okay. Now it's time to create some particles. So let's create an emitter. Then I will need a particle node. I want these particles to be 3D, so I will create a model node. And I want these particles to be physical, so I create a physical node. So that's it for now. And let's link these up. Emitter to the particles, particles to model, and the physical always to the particle node. Now in the emitter settings, first of all, I want this to be a grid. I want it to emit only once. I do not need any speed, so I can set this to 0. I want to change the resolution here a little bit, so let's say 15 times 15 times 15. And I also want to change the size a bit. Let's say 200 times 200 times 200, make it a little bit bigger. Then inside my particles, first of all, we have to increase the lifespan. By default, it's 2 seconds, but I want to make this 10 seconds at least. And I also want to change the size a bit. So in the particle properties, let's change the size. Now, first of all, what I forgot, I have to change it from circle to model so that we get 3D models here, as you see now. Actually, let me move in a bit with my custom view camera that we can see a bit more what's going on here. Oh, that was too close. Okay, like that. Now you see we have small cubes here. And of course, I do not want to use cubes in this case. I just want to use spheres. So let's move to the model node quickly and let's change this from file to primitive, and then we choose sphere. Okay. And actually, in this case, I probably could turn down the segments to make this a bit easier to handle. And now maybe 12 times 12. Let's see whether this will work. And I think we can still get, yeah, for the tutorial purpose, it's okay. So if you want to do a clean render, then you should probably leave it at 24 times 24. But just for the tutorial purpose, I will just turn this down. This will be a little bit easier than for my system. Okay, so I want to give a little bit of variation to the scale or to the size of these particles. So first of all, I want to scale them down overall, something like 7. And now I will increase the random size to 50. And you see we get a nice distribution now of different sizes here of particles. And now I think that all of these values are set. I can turn them into physical particles, and I just want them to be dynamic. That's okay. We can use a sphere to simulate because these are actually spheres. And I just want to change these settings a bit. So increase the bounce a little bit to 50 and decrease the mass to 75. Okay, and now I only have to do one more thing. If I go into my collider quickly by double clicking here on my group, and if I go to my material just for a moment and make this visible, I just want to show you what problem we've got here. So let's turn on the opacity for now. And you see that now in my setup, the particles are emitted below my floor. And if I now simulate, all of this will just fall down into eternity of the After Effects 3D space, and we do not want this. So we have to shift our emitter a little bit on the y-axis. So let's go to the emitter. Now I have to make this invisible again. So let's open this up again. And let's go to the material node here. Let's change this back to 0. Okay. Now in the emitter settings, I can shift this. And let's say I want to shift it 300 is enough. Okay. And now we could start a simulation. But before starting a simulation in Stardust, you always have to save your project. So let's save this project. And this is important because Stardust requires a path to create a Stardust cache folder like you see here. So I will just overwrite my Stardust physics tutorial here. And to create a simulation now, I have a few options. So first of all, let me just limit my work area here a little bit, because 6 seconds will be probably enough. Maybe 5 seconds would be enough for the sake of the tutorial. Let's see, let's make it 5 seconds long. And now inside the Stardust panel, the main panel, we have the physics settings. And again, I want to remind you, there is a basic introduction tutorial to all of the settings on the superluminal.tv website. So if I turn on the simulation and then we can click this cache in out button, then Stardust will start caching this simulation from the beginning. If I just leave it, so if I leave my time indicator right at 5 seconds, then it will just calculate all these frames into the cache in the background. But now let's see what will happen here. And you see now it's starting to simulate this. So our particles fall down, they hit our collider just as expected, and they spread nicely in our box. And we see that around 2 seconds, all of them are pretty much spread out and lying on this floor in our box. And this looks pretty good. So I can stop the simulation for now. This is what we got so far. Okay, now I just want to freeze this for a moment. And freezing means that I just tell Stardust not to calculate any simulations as long as this is set to freeze. And I want to do this because now I will create the title, and while creating and positioning the title, I do not need to recalculate any dynamics. So let's set this to freeze for now. And let's continue and create the 3D title or the 3D logo. To create a 3D extrusion, we will just use a preset. And if you open up the presets, by the way, by clicking on the preset browse buttons here, and go to models, you see we have this extrude folder. And here you have different extrude setups with different bevels. And in my case, I want to use extrude number 2, and I can click add, and this will add this extrude to my scene. And there's one more cool thing. If we take a look at our timeline here, if you create this extrude, Stardust will also create an environment layer and will also set it up in our settings. So we now have in our render settings under environment, we have this environment here, and we can use this later on to create a bit more of an interesting look. So that's pretty handy because this was not there before I created this extrude here. In my case, I do not need the emitter and the particle. It's enough if I have my model here. So let's delete these two nodes and let's just use this as a simple model with the material for now. And in my case, I want to create a Stardust logo. So I need some paths to extrude, and I will just import these quickly. So let me save the project, and now I go to import, and I will import a file. And I have this file here where my logo path is included, and I will just quickly copy this over. So I just select this layer, Ctrl+C to copy it, and I paste it into my main composition. And now I will just rename this to Stardust logo. And you see that Stardust also created this text layer, and this is actually the text that is extruded and that you can see here. But I want to change this now to this Stardust logo layer. Therefore, we just go to our node, and this is the model node. And now here inside this extrude properties, we can change the layer that should be extruded. In our case, it is the Stardust logo, and you will immediately see now this changes to our Stardust logo. So if you have paths, masks or vector paths of a logo, then you can create easy extrudes in Stardust. Now let's delete this Stardust text layer because we do not need this anymore. And you see that this is quite big, so I have to scale this down, and I can do this inside the model properties as well. So let's go there, and inside our model properties, you see we have this size, and I just scale this down to 25. This will do for now. I will change quickly to 4 views because I have to position this better, and I will use this view, the front view here. And first of all, I want to rotate it on X for -60 so that it is slightly angled. And this helps when we push through all these dynamic particles that they are not sticking onto our surface of the title, that they are rolling down from it, and that helps to reveal it. And now I will create a push animation. So I want it to push from below our collider through our collider. And first of all, of course, I also have to create a physical node here to make this a physical object. So let's create a physical node and let's link it to our model. Actually, I should really rename these so that we know what we are doing. And I will just rename this here to logo. And then we know this is our logo, 3D logo. Okay. Now, before I create the animation, let me quickly change the physical settings. I want this to be a kinematic object as well. So I want this to be a collider object, because otherwise it will also react to gravity and will just fall down here. So let's change this to kinematic, and let's change it from sphere to model. This is important. And everything else I can leave as it is. Now let's select our logo, and to animate this I could now come in here and change these values, but there is an easier and better way to do that, and I can create a control null by just clicking this create control null. This is under model properties, if you cannot see it, right here on the bottom. If you create control null or a null, then you see we get this model control. And this is now linked to our model, and I can use it to animate my model. And this is a very nice way to do it. So in this case, we only want to animate the Y position, so I can separate my dimensions to make this a bit easier. So I right click and choose separate dimensions. And now with my null selected, let me drag this down a bit and let's take a look. I will move it down a bit to create some speed. So because I want the model to push these particles away, so I need it to arrive here with a certain amount of speed. So I set this to 600, and at around 2 seconds I will create my first keyframe. And then I will move forward for 20 frames. And now let's see how far we have to drag this up, just until it is visible in our ball pit here. You see we have a value now of 490, maybe 480. A little bit more, yeah, like that. That looks pretty good. And now I've created this animation. And if we want to change the speed in the end of the animation, we can play a bit with the interpolation of the keyframes. So let's select this value and let's open up our graph editor. And I will just turn this into an ease out keyframe and this into an ease in one. And then I can play around here a bit. You see now the speed in the end is very low. And if I change the curve a little bit to something like that, then it will push through our particles a bit faster and it will spread them a little bit more. That's pretty cool. So let's create kind of this curve, and then we can create another simulation. So let's change back here to my active camera and to one view, of course, or custom view. Yeah, custom view is okay. I will save my project. And now I will go to Stardust, and in the physics I will change this again from freeze to on. And now I can just click cache in out. I could also just create a run preview and it would recalculate this. So let's wait until Stardust is now preparing the simulation. And then let's see what is going on here. Okay, so now it is recalculating. You see our particles again drop into our ball pit. And now when they are nicely spread, our 3D title will push through the surface here. And you see it pushes apart our small spheres. And it looks really cool. Maybe it's a little bit too fast, but I don't care. You know, you could just flatten this curve out a little bit and then it will push through a little bit more gently. But I think I like it as it is. And for the sake of this tutorial, that's definitely okay. Now I will just finish the simulation of the 5 seconds that I specified. Oh, it really looks cool. So I think we have a very, very nice simulation going on here. So I can set this back to freeze because actually I'm done with simulating. So let's set this back to freeze and just telling Stardust that the simulation is okay and we do not have to change it anymore. So now the simulation will just be read out of the cache and no changes will be applied. Now let's just make this model node invisible. Let's make the cam control invisible and the light null, just that they are not disturbing here in the middle. And now let's work on this scene and let's make this look great. Therefore, first of all, I change back to my active camera. And yeah, I can just turn off the Stardust logo layer. And now let's set up a nice camera angle. Therefore, I can use my cam control here and I will rotate this on X 60 degrees. And actually minus 60, of course, minus 60 degrees. And this is why I rotated the logo 60 degrees, because now they are really lined up. So the camera and the logo are lined up in the same orientation. And now I will just move in here, but I will move in on set of the camera position. So let's move in here until these particles fill our screen. I have to move in quite a bit here. So I think actually it was something like 650 and minus 650. Let's see. Quite good. Or minus 680. No, let's make it minus 650. Okay, this looks quite good. And let's take a look when my logo appears. Whether it's in the middle, it's not quite in the middle, so we have to shift this a little bit. And I will just shift it by selecting my cam control null and by changing its position. And in this case, I have to change it on the Z axis. So let's take a look. That was too much, a little bit, like 30. Okay. Good, now we have a nice camera angle, we have a nice simulation, and I do not want this part where the particles fall into place in my animation, so I can just actually start this animation at 1.5 seconds. I will just set my in point here to 1.5 seconds. Sorry if you hear strange noises in the background, my cat is just going crazy again. Okay, so everything is set up and now we can make this look interesting. So first of all, I want to colorize my particles, and to do that, I will just go to the particle node, and in the particle properties, I will change this from solid color to random from gradient. And in the gradient color, I will now just use a preset. I could determine my own colors, but for the sake of the tutorial, I'm a bit lazy, so I will just use one of the cool presets here. Let's choose this one and apply it. And I don't want this to be linear. I want this to be on hold so that we have a real separation between these. And actually what I forgot is I have to add a material because we are working with 3D models here. So let's add a material node and link it to my model. And now you see the colors are now really generated here like we expected. So again, in my gradient here, I will just change the distribution a bit. So let's say we want a bit more green and blue particles, so you can easily art direct here the distribution of these colors. And I think this looks really good. Okay, and we can now go to our material node and play around a little bit with these settings here. So first of all, maybe let's increase the gloss a bit. Let's take a look what this does. So increase this to 65 maybe. And you see now we get this bit of a sharper specular right here. And one more thing that I want to do to make this look good, I will just create another light in the scene. So let me quickly change to my 4 views and let me just duplicate the parallel light that I've already got. Just Ctrl D to duplicate it. And now with my easy setup with my null in the middle, I can just take this light and where is it? Right here, and pull it on the other side here of my scene. So now I just will create a backlight from this direction, and I can change the colors a bit. So let's do this blue thing here, blue backlight. Not that much, a little bit of blue. And let's change this one here to a slightly warmer color, bit of an orange, to make this look a little bit more interesting. Okay, now let's go back to our one view. And the next step is to introduce some shadows. So let's go back to our Stardust layer and to our render settings. And in the render settings, we have 2 options to introduce shadows. First of all, we have the ambient occlusion. If I turn this on, you will see what this does. So this will add realism to this immediately. You see now it looks way better. But actually, I think it is a little bit too intense. So I will turn down the intensity here to maybe 60. Because I also want to create shadows from the lights, and I can do this by just going into this shadows tab here and turning this on. And now you see we also have shadows from our lights. And you see, I think that my main light is a little bit too low because it's creating pretty harsh shadows. So let me go back to my 4 views here and let me change this a little bit. So I will just use my light number 1 and drag it up a little bit. And this should change the angle here of these shadows and make it a bit brighter. And I think this looks better. Okay, quite good. What I also can do is I come in here and I reduce the fall off to 750. And let's do the same here, just to make it a bit more subtle. Okay, I go back to my one view. And you see this looks really cool already. Now, as we have an environment in the scene, I could introduce some reflection on my spheres. So let's choose the material node again of my particles. And under the material node, we can go to the reflection, and this is set to null now. But if I set this to something like 5, so not too much, but a little bit. If I set it very high, then you see this will only reflect the environment. Still looks quite cool, something like Christmas balls now. But I think for this case it's way too much. So I want to turn this down to a really small amount so that it has something like a plastic feeling. So maybe 8 or 7 is okay. Doesn't look too bad, okay. And actually what I can do now is I want to increase the segments of my model. So this is pretty cool. I can use these spheres with the low polys to simulate, and then after the simulation is cached and frozen, I can just increase the segments and I do not have to recalculate again. So let's do that. Let's go to our model and let's just increase in the model properties. No, in the primitive properties. Yeah, let's increase this from 12 by 12 to 24 times 24, because then we will get nice spheres and this will look way better. And you see the simulation still works, so it doesn't really make any difference. Okay, this is good. Now let's just improve the look of our logo. So let's go to the logo material and let's take a look what we can do here. And I will leave the glass as it is, and I think I will just increase this to, let's say, 80 or 85. Looks quite good. And now to introduce a few more interesting reflections here, I can just shift my light a little bit. So again, let's move up to this place here and I can bring this in. I don't know where this is. This is so far out here. Don't quite understand that. Why is that so? Oh, this is the active camera. This is why it's strange. I need it to be the top view here. So let's change this from active to top. And now I have the view that I want. Now I can position my light nicely. Okay, so let's just grab this and let's move it over a bit more to the middle. I just want to introduce more reflections on my logo to make this look a little bit more interesting. And I think this looks pretty good. Let's move in a bit closer. That's too much. I just want to create a nice metal look and this looks really good. Okay, so this is good. And I want to reduce the power of this a little bit, maybe to 85. Let's see what this does. I do not want these to blow out, so I will even reduce it further to 75. We have two lights in the scene, so this is enough. And I could maybe increase the backlight a bit to make this a bit more intense, to create some contrast here in the scene. It doesn't look too bad. And what I also can do is I can just brighten up the whole scene overall. And I can do this by just adding an ambient light. So let's do that. Let's create a new ambient light. And let's set this down to a very small value of 20. And you see this will just brighten it up a bit. Maybe this is even too much. So maybe I set it only to 10. But you see it makes a difference and it just brightens up the whole scene a little bit. Okay, so I think this looks really cool. So as last step in this tutorial, let's create a quick run preview and see what we've got as a final result. And you see, because the simulation is already cached, it renders really fast. So you see that the RAM preview is really like in real time. Not quite, but playing at a good frame per second. So, and you see that the result is really quite cool. Good, this is it for this tutorial. I hope that you liked it. I hope that you learned a few new tips and tricks in Stardust and you see how powerful these physics options are. I thank you very much for watching and I really hope to see you soon. Goodbye.